Welcome to the PD Pet Care Vlogs. With microchipping now compulsory for almost all dogs and potentially becoming compulsory for cats in New Zealand soon, certainly as a requirement of some councils already, let's have a wee chat about what microchips are, how they work, what the positive sides of them are, and perhaps what the downsides are, and then give you a wee demo of how a microchip is actually placed. I'm Dr. Cath Watson, and I'm going to take you through all of those things today, and hopefully you'll come away having a much better understanding of what microchips are and what they do and what they don't do. So microchips can be placed in any species, not just cats and dogs. They've certainly been placed in elephants, in our kakapo, in horses, in turtles, all sorts of species. So they can go into any species. All a microchip actually is a wee chip that has a unique identifying number on it inside a wee silicon bead that's about the size of a grain of rice. So they're not very big at all. They don't actually transmit or interact with the body in any way whatsoever. They are usually placed under the skin or in a muscle or in a big tendon in something like a horse. So aiming to put them somewhere ideally that they don't move. Because they contain a unique number and they don't transmit, we need some way of reading them. So what we use is a scanner. So this is the sort of thing that scanners look like. They're really simple. All they do, push a button to turn it on, scan it over a microchip, up comes a number. So that's the identifying number that that particular microchip has in it. So the way the scanners work is radio waves, and they have to be very close to the microchip. So the scanner has to be generally put over the surface of the animal to actually pick up the microchip. They won't work from, a distance out here. I'm not going to read that microchip. I actually have to come quite close to it for it to actually be able to read that number, and you hear the wee beep when it gets close. So there is no real danger to an animal from having a microchip in there because the microchip itself doesn't do anything. So there is no data stored on the microchip. It is just a unique number. That's it. All the details about that animal, so it's maybe the animal's name, its species, who owns it, sex, all those other details, colour, they're actually stored on a computer database against that number. So, like I say, the microchips are not dangerous. They aim to last a lifetime. So once they've been placed in the body, they'll just stay there. They don't dissolve, they don't interact, they don't cause any issues in the body, they just stay there. So why would you want to use a microchip? Well, first of all, for dogs, obviously, aside from working dogs, it's actually a legal requirement, and that's likely to come in play for cats in the next few years as well. It's a permanent form of ID. They can't lose it. It's not like a collar with a tag which can be lost when they're out roaming or getting hooked up in a tree. Because it's a permanent identification, if something happens to your cat or your dog and somebody finds them, then all they've got to do is take them to the council or a veterinary clinic or a rescue organisation. Anyone who's got a scanner, they do a quick scan, they can search the database, find out who they need to contact, and they can be returned to you really quickly. It's also really useful as a unique ID for breeding animals. So it means that they've got a permanent identification. Any genetic testing or, say, pen hip x-rays for dogs, any of that sort of stuff is then coded to them. That is their records that can't be mistakenly attributed to somebody else. It's also really useful for some of these species that we're trying to save from extinction or breeding programs, where individuals can actually be quite difficult to identify. So you think something like a kakapo, how do you tell whether they're male or female just by looking at them? They might have some unique identifying features that the people really close to them will be able to tell them apart, but otherwise a microchip is going to make sure that we know exactly which bird that is. So really useful for helping to manage populations as well. We know we've got a stray cat problem in New Zealand, and this is one of the motivations behind considering microchipping for cats. If we've got a microchipped cat that's been caught in a live capture trap or been identified in a colony and we know it's got a microchip, we know that cat has someone who's looking out for it. If it doesn't have a microchip, and particularly if it's in an area that it shouldn't be, then we know it's safe to remove them from that area as well. In some cases it can be useful when there's a dispute over ownership of an animal, although because the microchip itself is just a unique identifying number, it's the database that's got all the details on it. It can certainly in some cases help with those disputes, but there's a few more legal technicalities there. So are there any downsides of microchips? There's some, but they're pretty minor. So first up, they can fail. It's extremely rare, but it has been known to happen. So what I would strongly recommend is that any animal that's got a microchip, when they're coming for their annual health check, just ask for the microchip to be scanned to make sure it's still working. At the same time that that's happening, we can also check whether they've moved. Generally, most of the modern microchips won't move, but some have been known to. So this is just under the effects of gravity, essentially. So mostly for cats and dogs, we'll end up putting the microchip in the back of the neck or between the shoulder blades. So it's on top of the animal, and I say normally they stay there. Every so often we'll find they end up migrating and they'll end up down by a shoulder or an elbow or maybe over the chest or under the neck. Not going to cause any problems in those locations, but because most commonly when we're checking for microchips, we're scanning around the back of the neck, we may not find it. So knowing that it's moved is also really useful, but can be a downside of them. Probably the biggest downside is the fact that, like I say, the microchip is just a unique number. All the data needs to go on a database. So there's a human element in there, and unfortunately we're not infallible. So a microchip actually, or microchip number, is actually only in use if it is actually registered. And obviously if it's going to be registered, you need to make sure that those details are correct. So if you're going to move house, change your phone number, any of those things, then you need to actually update the database as well. Otherwise, when, if your animal is picked up wandering, or has been injured and somebody tries to contact you and those contact details aren't correct, then obviously the microchip's not quite so useful. So there is that human element, that's the downside of the microchip, but making sure that you keep those details up to date means that the microchip itself can actually continue to do its job, which is uniquely identify that animal. So I want to show you what a microchip looks like. This is just one example, there's a few of them, but essentially this is actually an insertion device. So in the packet, we have a list of barcodes. So this is the unique number that this particular microchip is going to hold. So the microchip itself, it's inserted with a needle, just like giving any other injection. So it's literally a needle. And it might look like it's really big, but at the end of the day, this is not a whole lot bigger than a needle that's used for a vaccination. It's really sharp, which may or may not sound like a good thing to you, but generally the sharper the needle, the less painful it actually is going in. You can imagine putting a big blunt thing in wouldn't be much fun at all. So when it comes to placing a microchip, it just goes underneath the skin in the back of the neck of an animal. And I'm going to just inject this one so you can see what the microchip itself looks like and how big it is. So if I pull that out of there, that's it. So that's the size of a microchip. It really is quite little, just basically the size of a grain of rice. Put it on my hand for you as well. Hopefully you can see it there. It's really not very big. So it's just inserted by that needle under the skin, really straightforward. Doesn't cause any pain. These are single use, so it's not like we go and load another microchip and use it again, which means they're really sharp, sterile, no issues putting them in. So the only issue we see every so often is that when the needle is inserted, The microchip is injected under the skin, and then we pull the needle back out. Every so often, the microchip will actually follow the needle back out. So what we do after the microchip's been put in, just give the coat a wee ruffle, make sure nothing's going to fall out, and then we scan afterwards to make sure the microchip actually is in place. The hole that's left by the needle heals over very, very quickly, and those microchips then end up staying in place for the life of the animal. So I hope that's helped you understand what a microchip is, how it works, why they're a really good thing as far as permanent identification that lasts a lifetime and doesn't cause any problems, not dangerous, doesn't react, but also the importance of getting them checked regularly to make sure they're working, and obviously making sure that the database with the important details, contact details for you, are kept up to date.